Today's guest is someone that I met recently after we, of all people, high conflict divorce strategists, joined the Amicable Divorce Network. Her name is Chloe O. There she is. Let me get her on. Broad, because Chloe is from the UK and she also specializes in a lot of issues involving couples in having to co-parent in different countries, dealing with international issues. Hey, Chloe.
Hi, Lisa. How
I'm
are
always like,
you?
so I'm happy that this works. So I'm always like, I'm relieved. I'm relieved. How
Not
about
always
you?
very smooth on Insta, but we got it.
I know. Great. Great. Yeah. So it's funny because I was saying how we're going to, one of the things that you specialize in is international couples or dealing with co-parenting across borders or how to get divorced when you're living in different countries. And we had a client just this morning dealing with this issue. And I was like,
Ah,
give me questions that you have and frustrations. So before you even introduce yourself,
yeah.
I'm going to shoot one at you. Money. If somebody chooses to move away to another country and they're not even from that country, they just decide to leave,
Yeah.
who should be paying for all the flights and the costs associated with
That's
that?
usually a very big point of debate, and it usually has to do with who leaves first. So, if you're living together and then you're the one who's left,
Mhm.
then there's an impression that, well, you made that choice, right? And you're going to have to carry that burden. But it really depends. It's usually negotiated, and from one judge to the other, you'll get a completely different response. In a negotiation, I would recommend, if you're trying to convince your ex to let you go abroad with your kids, you might want to give them that one and facilitate at least the financial burden for them. But it's all part of that conversation.
Oh, well, that's really good to know. So, okay, before we continue, Chloe, introduce yourself officially.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to see lots of names coming up. So thank you all for joining. So I am Chloe O, as Lisa said. I'm based in London, but I work internationally. And the way I always describe my job is that my role is to help people divorce without going to war. So I support people who want to have a divorce that is not going to destroy their children, their relationship with their ex, or their wallet. And I help them stay the course, because even with the best of intentions, it's really hard to negotiate your divorce. You're splitting everything up, and there's legal challenges that come up. There's a lot of conflict that comes up, which is absolutely inevitable. But I help them achieve the divorce that they want to achieve. So that's really my big focus. And then I have that additional specialty that helps me support people who are in that international context, whether it's a couple who has gone together as a family project to live, I don't know, in Dubai or whatnot, or one of the spouses is from, the US and one spouse is from Germany, and the German spouse moved to the US to be with their other spouse. And so whatever the context, that international element adds a lot of complexity, and it does require someone who knows how that works, and the challenges that you face.
Yeah. And that's why, even though both you and I are divorce coaches, we have such different areas of expertise. And I think
Sure.
it's so helpful to have someone like you to talk to, because international is not our area of expertise at all, but we have a lot of clients all over the world. And so I know this can help them. What are some of the specific issues you see that come up with international couples during and post
Very,
divorce?
yeah, that's a good question, actually. I mean, one of the very common ones is immigration, and people don't think about it. They think, I'm getting divorced. What does that have to do with my visa? But in a lot of cases, it does.
Yeah.
And, in the UK, for example, if you split up from your spouse and you don't have an individual right to live and work here, so on your own 2 feet, then you've got 60 days to leave the country. And that starts running from the day the relationship ends, not from the divorce, from the day you break up.
How do you know
60 days.
what that means? Like what is the breakup day? Because often here in the US, it's like we don't know when they break up, but it's when the papers file. That's when the clock
Well,
starts.
they're supposed to tell the Home Office, so the government, the minute it happens. It's based on people being honest. In reality, you don't. I mean, it's hard to do, and sometimes you also don't know if you're going to get back together. It feels like a very important step, but it will be certainly from the moment you file. that is a clear indication that you're not planning on being with that person
Right.
anymore.
Right. Right.
So that's a very big one. And then the other one that comes very quickly afterwards in that really kind of preparation phase for the divorce is choosing where to divorce. Because when the couple has attachments to different countries, they usually have a choice as to which country to divorce in. And every country has its own rules, has its own approach. Some of them favor men, some of them favor women, some of them I don't know, are very litigious. Others are very focused on amicable resolution. There's so many, some of them are very expensive to divorce and others are much cheaper. So there's all these considerations that need to be looked at to define what is the best place to divorce for you. And that's usually one of the first decisions that needs to be made. And it's a very scary one. In reality, it rarely changes that much to the outcome, especially if you're trying to negotiate the agreement. But because it happens so early on in the process, people kind of, get very overwhelmed with that decision, and it feels so important. So that's another big one. And then during the divorce, the big part is relocation. Because
Mhm.
when you're, I'll come back to my example of the German person who moved to the US to be with their spouse. The minute they're divorcing, what the hell are they doing in the States? They were there for their spouse. And so they may have built a whole life there and feel perfectly happy, but there's always that reflection that comes up of, is this a good time for me to go back actually? Because I have my family and I have my friends, and it's like kind of going back into your own, little shell of comfort, which is completely understandable when you're feeling vulnerable and going through all this upheaval. And so that conversation always happens at some point or another. Sometimes people decide not to, but you do need to plan for what will happen if you do choose to do it, how that would all work. Because if it is an option, it may not be something you do now, but at some point it might come back, and you want to try and anticipate that as much as possible so that you can have your agreements, at the time of the divorce, that already plan what happens in that case.
Yeah, so our community is high conflict divorce and post judgment. So everyone probably listening and watching this now and later is dealing with some form of domestic violence.
Mhm.
And often there's terrible fear that, especially when someone's in an abusive relationship, if I leave, I'm going to have to leave the country, and I'm going to have to leave my kids behind.
Yeah, and it happens a lot. I mean,
Really?
I've got a client right now who is in Saudi Arabia. She's British, her
Mhm.
husband's British, but they're in Saudi Arabia, and they went there for his job. And she can't leave the country without him even, signing a paper. I don't know what he needs to do, but she needs his approval to travel. So forget about even taking the kids anywhere. And she's completely kept prisoner in Saudi Arabia because her kids are there. He will not let the children leave. Locally, it is the dad who has to approve any kind of travel for anybody in the family. And people find themselves completely stranded. And that, I think, is something that people don't think about up front, but when they're making those plans to relocate, if your marriage is on the rocks, don't go somewhere you don't want to stay, because
Mm.
it's going to be really, really hard to bring the kids back. And if you're dealing with somebody who's abusive or high conflict, try convincing them. You're putting yourself into a huge challenge, in a really difficult situation. So if you can avoid it, it's probably the best way to go. But if you're dealing with somebody who wants to be, so pardon my French, but a pain in the ass, they're going to be a pain in the ass, and they're going to make it as painful as possible. And when it relates to your kids, you don't want to leave them behind. So it's important to really, think those things through, ideally ahead of time. But if you're in that situation, make sure that you can, you've got a strategy for how to negotiate with that person, because it's an upward battle, that's for sure.
Yeah. You're making me think of someone we know who is all the way in Africa, and their ex is American, and their ex wasn't really involved in a lot of the child raising. And their ex wants to now pull the kids to America. And so the person we know is like, wait, how can this happen? Or should I be worried about this?
It, it's a tough one. I mean, in general, it's very difficult to relocate children because, especially in the States and in the UK, it's in France as well, is the best interest of the children is always the top priority, right? And so you'd have to prove that they're going to be a lot better off somewhere else to where they're currently living, where they have all their friends, where they have their activities. So you've got to have a really compelling case to do that. So in general, the legal approach is not favorable to the parent who's trying to move the kids, which is
Right.
why you need to find a way to negotiate. It doesn't mean you're going to be buddies and best friends with your ex, but
No.
you need to find an arrangement, even if you use somebody as a buffer, to help you have that negotiation. It is much more effective as a negotiated approach, because legally it's going to be a really hard one to win.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned before, I'm thinking of the term jurisdiction. That seems to be an issue because a lot of our clients don't live in the same place. And how, you said it is important with the countries. Is jurisdiction, like you mentioned that it depends on the judge, but do you see like real differences in where jurisdiction is? Like should someone be fighting for it to be more in their home base? Like let's say that person in Africa versus America. Should the African be like, I'm going to fight to have jurisdiction here because the laws would tend to be better for me because
I don't
that's where
think it's that the laws will be more favorable to whoever's from that country. It's just
Mhm.
different countries work in different ways. So I'll give you an example. A lot of my clients are from Europe, mainland Europe, but they live in the UK. They're going to have to consider the different regimes. In England, you have to do a full financial disclosure as part of the process. You cannot have a financial arrangement if you haven't done a full disclosure. That doesn't exist in Europe. So if you're concerned that your ex is hiding money, the English jurisdiction becomes a lot more attractive, because there are actual legal repercussions if they hide money or if they lie on their disclosure. There's a real legal process for them to disclose their assets, which doesn't exist in those other
That is
countries.
really important just to pause there because like most of our clients who are dealing with financials, because it is high conflict, it's a given that their ex is probably going to hide money.
So that, for me, somebody who tells me that their ex is controlling them, or even those who don't even realize. I have a client who was telling me, "Oh, my husband gives me spending money, so I have to ask
Mm-hmm.
him every time." She has no concept that that's abuse,
Yeah.
but that's just how they've been operating, right? But for somebody in that kind of situation, it's going to really matter to have that visibility of the assets, because she has no clue what's there. And
Yeah.
so that would certainly tip the balance in favor of divorcing in England, if that's one of the countries she has a choice on. But then there's other bits like, prenups in France, they're enforced very rigidly. In the UK, the judge will review it and take it into consideration, but it's not binding, strictly speaking.
Wow.
Another way to take into account, if you're really, really keen on upholding your prenup, then France is probably a better bet than the UK. So all of those decisions that you're making are very much based on your own situation, what's important to you, what you really want to get out of this divorce, because that's all the kind of factors you're going to have to look at.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So are there certain types of families that you work with?
I mean, no, actually, no. I mean, in fact, aside from the fact that they tend to be international,
Mm-hmm.
um, I get very different ages of people. A lot of I've noticed an increase in gray divorce lately.
Uh-huh.
I
Just
think
explain what that is
yeah,
for people who don't understand grade
so
divorce.
people who are divorcing in later life. That's simple. I saw an article in the New York Times recently. It was saying that the rate of divorce among 65-year-old plus has
Yeah.
tripled since 1990.
Yeah.
So there's definitely, with life expectancy increasing, people are making decisions that they didn't used to make at 60 or 70, and it's being like, you know what, I've got 20 years left with this person. Actually, I don't want to.
Yeah.
And so you see a lot of more divorce later in life, and people have different priorities and different concerns. So I have a mix of, people who are in that kind of mindset of, I'm not trying to destroy what I had with this person for 40 years. My kids are grown up. I just want to move on with my life. And people who are young, have a lot of money at stake, have very young children, have sometimes situations of abuse. So it really is a mixed bag. But what they have in common is that they're not at home and they're
Mhm.
isolated. I mean, divorce is a very lonely experience in general for people anyway. It's inevitably a difficult experience. But if you're isolated from the people that are part of your support network, it's that much harder. And that's where I feel that I can really be their partner throughout that experience, because I'm informed. I'm not just a buddy.
Right.
And I have that experience of what it looks like, how it feels of getting divorced when you're not at home.
Yeah. So speaking of that, I'm thinking of a number of clients we have who have moved, not necessarily out of the country, but they have relocated to another place for their spouse's job. They get divorced and they want to move back to be with their family, let's say across the country for us, and their ex doesn't allow it, and they have such a hard time, and they do feel really isolated, like they're stuck. I'm thinking in particular now I have an international client in my head where they were from Israel and they came here because one person's job.
Yeah.
But the promise that was made, of course, not on paper, was that after a couple of years they would go back to Israel. Well, of course, now they're getting a divorce in America, and the one party is like, no, we're staying. Like, I am not going back to, even though the other party is like, but our whole family is there, like, you know, everybody.
Maybe
and
they've
everybody.
weaponized it as well, you know. Maybe they're just thinking that's a good way of, you know, getting that, you know, whatever scenario, if it's he, she, or whatever, but it's a very good way of making the other person's life miserable because you know that you're keeping them somewhere they don't want to be.
Right. And we see a lot with even the summer vacation time where now the other side is not allowing this person even to go for the summer or for weeks. So that person, our client, is being really isolated from the family. And of course, the family is getting very involved in the case, trying to do everything they can to try to negotiate. But, you know, legally, yeah, the lawyers have been like, this is where you live now, and this is where you've been for a couple of years. This is where your son has been born. And so it is really hard to just say, I'm going back to Israel.
And I think that's where, again, you need that specialized support. You know, when you're writing your child arrangements or your parenting plan, you need someone who understands what it's like to live in that international context and who can put in those agreements some specific clauses that don't matter to your average Joe who lives, you know, a mile away from their family, but matters.
Let's talk about that. Like, let's talk about some of the clauses, because I actually was going to say that came up this morning with another client where like, what about all the grandparents like who want to see the kids? So what can you recommend?
There's one that comes up every time is who keeps the passports, because that makes a big difference in your ability to travel, right? The other one is, do you need the permission of the other person every time you want to leave the country? If you do, how long ahead of time? What form does it need to take? What information do you need to give them before they can give you that authorization? So, you know, some people say just give the flight information or, you know, where you're going to be staying, but others want to know who the kids are going to see and what they're going to be doing, and, you know, all of those kind of additional pieces of information. So you need to make sure that that parenting plan is anticipating any potential problems you'll have later on and really spelling out all those parameters with regards to international travel, but also things like who picks up the kids. You know, they also take a very stereotypical.
Who flies the kids?
Who fly, exactly. So imagine, you know, the kids are living mostly with the mom, but the dad is now in another country. Who's paying for those flights back and forth? Where's the dad staying when he comes to pick up his kids?
Right.
Because if he's far away, he can't go back and forth the same day.
Right. And at what age can the kids travel alone?
At what age are they allowed to travel alone? I mean, there's so many different elements to anticipate. And sometimes when your kids are quite small, you don't think of it. But actually, they're going to be important questions to take into consideration. You're going to have to think about how that fits into your kid's life as well.
Right.
You know, another typical example is people who want to relocate abroad with their kids, and they tell the other spouse, okay, you'll have them all the holidays to make up for the time. Well, that means you're never going to take a holiday with your kids. You got to think about that. Make sure that you're comfortable with that. And what is that going to mean to your kids as well, that they've never had a holiday with you? So there's a lot of elements like that that really need to be considered, and that, you know, your average lawyer certainly would not know and would not recommend that you document, but actually putting it as part of the agreement saves you a lot of headaches later on because it's been dealt with and discussed and agreed.
Yeah. So speaking of something you mentioned, this has been such a bane or a thorn in some of our client side, that consent letter. We've seen it weaponized every single time with like when they travel internationally to go back to our client's home country, that the other side, even though it says in the agreement that it's supposed to be provided, that they wait until the last second. Flights have to be changed all the time because of nonsense. Like, if you don't do this for me, then I'm not going to give you the consent letter. Is there any way around something like that where it doesn't have to happen 2 to 3 times a year to go through all this, jumping through hoops just to go visit family, especially if it's already in the agreement
Yeah.
that they're supposed to get the
I
consent
mean, the other
letter.
big classic is when you need help with getting the passports renewed, and
Yeah.
you
Oh,
need the
yeah.
parent to send you, either a notarized note or to be with you even at the appointment, whatever it might be. And they're
Yeah.
going to use that to make your life hell. And it's not that they don't want the kid to have a passport. They're just thinking that's a really good way to make their life miserable for
Right.
a few weeks.
To
And
get leverage.
exactly.
Yeah.
So there are things that you can put in the agreement. Certainly in England, there by default, the parent who has the children the most is allowed to travel up to 28 days without permission of the other. So it's a agreed by default that they would allow that travel.
Wow. We don't have anything like that.
So I have
That's
no idea
amazing.
what kind of legal standing that would have if somebody put that in their agreement in the US, but it's certainly something to explore with a lawyer to see whether they could include that. The other thing is you can write that letter open-endedly. You can say, or not open-ended, but for long term, you can say, I'm authorizing my husband to travel with our children abroad between this date and that date. And it can be, a 5-year agreement. So at least you don't have to negotiate
Ooh,
every single time that you're going through the process. But
that
it's
is
things that you have to
really helpful.
it, it also depends on the relationship you have with your ex. The other big one that comes up is expenses. People who have these agreements where they share, they have a basic, child maintenance amount, but then everything else is shared equally. And they agree that every time there's an expense, they're going to agree whether they both, want to pay for that and then split it. You
Hmm.
spend your life negotiating with your ex and trying to recover that money. Maybe it's easier to just say, you know what, you give me $100 more a month and that'll cover it, and I take care of it. So
Yeah.
it's thinking about those kind of dynamics to make sure that the agreement is going to try and avoid you as much conflict and as many headaches as possible.
What you just said is something during my own divorce that it wasn't with travel, but my lawyer said, I don't want you to have to go through everything that you just described, every decision, money. So we agreed on a set price per child that my ex would pay besides child support, like to cover extracurriculars and whatever. And even though for some years I was still paying a lot more, but later it ended up working out, but it just avoided all of the back and
Yeah.
forth over. It was a brilliant idea. It worked out really well for us.
And it's true that in practice you do end up paying more than because you never anticipate everything that's going to
Right.
show up.
Right.
But if that's the price for your peace of mind, it's probably worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I was going to say, what have you seen? We talk about people wanting to leave the country, and you have to. Do you know anybody who is, I don't want to say kidnapped, but left the country with their kid because they didn't like the agreement? And they're like, I have to get away.
I haven't had any clients who did that, but I've had some who have contemplated it, and not in a sense of I'm going to kidnap my kids.
Right, but
It's more like,
I don't want to deal with this.
or,
Like, I
or it's
need to do
sometimes
it.
sometimes it's, I mean, in a lot of cases it's during the summer holidays
Mm-hmm.
where they traditionally go back anyway to their home country with the kids to spend the summer, and they say, well, I'm not going to come back,
Right.
so I'm just going to go. Tend to be going on holiday. Sometimes the spouse doesn't even know they're getting a divorce at that stage. They
Yeah.
pretend they're going on holiday, and then they say, I'm not going back. The amount of trouble you get into with the Hague Convention for doing that is absolutely not worth it. The advantage that people find is that it's so long to get that rectified through courts that by then the kids are established and they have an argument to keep them there. But it is illegal and it's a serious offense to do that, and it really can be used against you. So it's not, my job is to help them avoid doing things like that are going to get them in trouble with the law, and that also are not going to align to their values. Do you really want to be that person? So
Yeah.
it's trying to prevent that, but I've never had anyone who'd actually done it.
Yeah, we of course, because that's the world we operate in. We do know people who have done that. Most of them we met after they had already done it and dealt with the consequences. So it is important, like you said, the thing with the Hague Convention, to really understand that there are severe consequences. We've seen custody completely flipped. We've seen not just custody flipped, but parental contact restricted 100% for doing stuff like that. So you really want to be careful. And think about, like, not just at that moment, but the future, even with these domestic violence situations.
Especially so because you're giving ammunition to the other person. Then they
A
don't need
lot.
any ground. Then they just need to show that you've done something so bad, and they're the hero, and you're the asshole who took the kids away. So
Right.
you're giving them a stick to beat you with. So it's
I
really
know. There's a comment that says, I was told by my lawyer to do this. I didn't, of course. Oh my gosh.
I'm gonna report that lawyer.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
gonna try
We've also, yeah, we've seen not just crossing international boundaries, but we have had people come to us and said, my lawyer said to take the kids to my parents and didn't realize like me crossing state lines and keeping them there. And they got in trouble for that too.
Yeah, you got to be careful. Again, you need somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Right. You always want to check with professionals. Don't just do stuff like that. Yeah. How important do you think cultural issues are when putting together a parenting plan?
That's an interesting one. I have a client right now who was telling me she's married to a man who's from India.
Mhm.
And in India, there's a real tradition of the children taking care of their parents. And so they have a lot of multi-generational living. And when the parents retire, they often move in with the children or their grown children and live with them. And so she was saying that now that they're getting divorced, he wants to have his parents come over and stay in the house with the children. And that's causing a lot of conflicts in terms of how they're going to raise the kids, because she's saying, well, then your time with the kids is not really going to be your times with the kids. It's you're going to be your mom taking care of the kids, and you're just not going to take, because his mom's going to end up being the one who takes care of everything. And so there's, those kind of cultural differences come, they definitely come into account. And then there's also cultural expectations that vary.
Mhm.
In a common example that I'm exposed to is, people who come from France, that is a country where law is codified. Everything is written down. They
Mhm.
come from a country like the UK or like the US, where it's common law and it's based on precedent, and the judge has a lot of flexibility with how they want to apply the law. And they don't understand that things aren't written black and white in some book somewhere that are going to dictate exactly the terms of their divorce. And so that's part of the kind of cultural translation that I need to do with them, for them to be making the right decisions, because they think it's written down and it's just a matter of the judge opening the book and finding the right
Oh,
paragraph.
oh
And
no.
all of that is very important, in terms of the expectations you bring to the divorce experience.
Right. And Chloe, you coach in English as well as
Yes.
French too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
should definitely mention that. Um, yeah, I mean that's unusual. What about things with, so we mentioned stuff with the Indian family with the moving in and all of that. How do you see things culturally also with like kids' appearances? We've seen issues with haircuts being like a really big deal.
I haven't had that. What I see a lot is the cultural importance after the divorce, especially if they relocate the kids. But we know if one parent is from one culture and the other's from another, usually there's less goodwill
Yeah.
after the divorce to maintain the culture of the parent who's less present.
Mhm.
And for the children, that's actually a real loss, because there's a huge advantage in being multicultural and speaking several languages and being exposed to all of that diversity, whether you like the ex or not.
Right,
The
right,
culture is perfectly valid. It is an
right.
asset.
And your child is half that.
Exactly. And you want to give them that advantage in life, especially if it's, language skills and stuff. And so that's when, I work a lot with my clients in that kind of post-divorce co-parenting space. How do you maintain that culture, especially if one of the parents is far away? How can you do, expose them to the cuisine, expose them to movies, to the music, whatever it is, because that is ultimately going to be an incredible advantage for your children. And that's where moving past your resentment or your, whatever feelings you have towards your ex, is going to be about, trying to dissociate the fact that you don't like that person with the fact that their culture is still something that can be really good for your kids and that you want to nurture.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a big one that comes up. And, it can be religion, or it can be culture. It can be a lot of different things.
Yeah. And I think people generally don't consider things like this when they are getting divorced because it's so overwhelming that often I feel like the parenting plan is really, really important, getting those details in there, because we always say that's like, you wouldn't use the word constitution, but we do. Like we say, that's your constitution. That's the law.
Yeah,
And so it's so important to understand these details ahead of time,
absolutely.
because a parenting plan to us is a proposed order,
Yeah.
especially if it's an agreement. Like you need to not just think for now, but till that kid in our country, till at least they're
Yeah.
18.
That's that's a big one. I mean, in general, first of all, the importance of just having that agreement, having that conversation, and then putting it in writing. It's something I go on and on about with my clients, and I have a lot of them who say, I mean, I had one lady who came to me the other day, and she said, "Oh no, we don't have any problem. We've agreed every other weekend." And I said, "Well, that's not a parenting plan.
No, and
Every other weekend.
that would
What happens on
never work in our.
happens for their birthday? Who can travel with them? Can they stay overnight with somebody else? There's so many elements to think about." And so she was like, "Oh shit, I hadn't thought about all that," you know?
And legal decision making, that's huge in our world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Who's going to make those education decisions, their health decisions, all of that?
And
People think that it's about the cadence, and it really isn't.
yeah, and not just assuming like, okay, if we don't agree, Chris, my partner, writes high conflict parenting plans. It's not if we don't agree, it's when we don't agree, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
Let's build in the plan to stay out of court,
Yeah.
because once we go back to court,
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, you can put it in there that you're going to agree to do family mediation if there's something you can't agree on.
yeah.
It's about
Yeah. So
anticipating. And if
sorry,
you're not, I was just saying it's about anticipating those things. And if you haven't been through it and you don't have the experience, you don't think of it because it's, it's foreign. And it's only once you're actually in the situation, having all the pain that goes with it, that you realize, oh, darn, I should have put that in the paper. So it's really helpful to have that advice early on to avoid those mistakes that, can cause real headaches later on.
right. And also what you mentioned earlier is because these are very specific details, a lot of times a general divorce attorney would never think of it.
Exactly.
They have like basic templates, and that's why it's so important to have resources like you or me about things that we know are different than just normal divorce.
And then electing your lawyer, you want to make sure that they're somebody who knows what they're talking about as well. So that's part of the process, is also making sure that you're hiring somebody. And I'm talking lawyer, but it could be any professional you're relying on. Just that making sure that they understand your situation, that they've dealt with these kind of situations before, that they can anticipate those kind of issues because they know what it's about. If it's somebody who's used to doing very local divorces, they're not going to think about those things.
Yeah, there's a term for it, I think, that applies. It's called cultural competency. It's making sure you find professionals who have experience with families like yours or situations like yours.
Absolutely.
Because if they don't, I mean, that could make things so much worse and cost you a lot of money and time and energy and grief
for sure
down the road.
Yeah. And even with the best intentions, they can't really support you well.
Right. And you're stuck. Like once that agreement is signed or that order's made, like that, there it is. And you can't just run back and change it. Absolutely. At least where we are, and in most places in the world, you have to wait a minimum of 1.5 to 2 years to file a modification unless it's an emergency. And even that can be really tricky. So you want to get it right from the beginning.
Absolutely. And then also, do you really want to, once you're finally done with your divorce, do you want to start all that again? And, a lot of people can't be bothered. At that point, you just live with it because who's going to go through all that again?
I know. A lot of our clients' exes do want to start that all over again because they want to keep engaged. but our clients don't want to, of course. So,
you're not that conflict person. You'd rather have peace than win that one.
Right. So did we miss, are there any other key tips to getting divorced abroad that we didn't cover?
I mean, there's going to be a million specific situations those are kind of the typical kind of challenges that we see. Yeah. But I think in terms of tips, I think I've made it very clear, really using professionals who are familiar with these kind of cases and who have that experience so that they can avoid, it's not that much mistakes, it's omissions that are really costly. The second thing I'd say is just make sure that you're planning ahead. There's, if you think that you might be going back to that country or to whatever at some point, try and put it into your plans. Think about the tax implications, because a lot of child maintenance, for example, will be taxed in certain countries, not in others. So make sure that that's reflected in your agreements and that you're allowing for that kind of flexibility. Exchange rates, that's another one. So anticipating all of that and trying to really plan ahead and get that expert advice, the immigration implications I mentioned earlier, all of that, you want to make sure that you've got that solidly thought through and documented. And I think, just having a really good parenting plan that incorporates all of these matters that we talked about that are in your run-of-the-mill kind of clause in an arrangement, but actually to you are going to make a massive difference.
Yeah.
So that
Oh my
parenting
gosh.
plan needs to be solid.
Chloe, this is so helpful, not just to our community, but to me as well, because we are putting together an online course and part of it has to do with parenting plans and the things you're saying. And I'm jotting down like, ooh, Chris is the one who does those plans, but I never considered exchange rates and taxes in different countries. And so, and the immigration implications, so important.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to think of that go way beyond the divorce itself. And again, the right professional will know and will have the contact, put you in touch with the right people to give you that advice, but someone else wouldn't think of it.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, this has been so helpful. Can you tell people how to find you?
Yeah, so I've got a website, very simple. It's thedivorceandseparationcoach.com. And on there, you will find tons of information. I have a weekly podcast, a newsletter, a million videos and articles that people can refer to. And there's a big pink button at the top to book a free discovery call. And it is completely free and no strings attached. If anybody just wants to run their situation past me and see how I can help them, I'm more than happy to have that chat. And then they can decide if they want to proceed or not. But it's always nice to meet people and to be able to help them.
Oh, thank you so much, Chloe. I'm so glad that we met, through this network, even though I didn't get to meet you in person yet. But we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you for having me. It's been great talking
Okay,
to you.
my
Take
pleasure.
care, Lisa.
Bye.